Hey everyone, welcome to Locked on Lakers for Wednesday. Brian Kamenetsky, Andy Kamenetsky. The Lakers want to lighten LeBron James's load this season, but is that easier said than done? That's next.
You are Locked on Lakers, your daily Los Angeles Lakers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks to everybody for making Locked on Lakers your first listen of every day, Monday through Friday, no matter how or where you get your podcasts. It's always going to be free. It's never going to be behind a paywall. And Locked on Lakers on YouTube is where you can go to see the show, hang out with a bunch of Lakers fans, 20,000 subscribers strong, 20,000 plus, I might say. I want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can bet $5 to get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. Yeah, Andy, that YouTube channel, they're talking a little bit about what we were talking about for Tuesday's show, which was Austin Reeves and the World Cup, and whether or not he could be included in a trade for Giannis in 2 years and all that stuff. But one of the things that we were getting into a little bit was whether or not Reeves is somebody who, from a usage standpoint, from a minute standpoint, could really genuinely take some burden off of LeBron. We've both said that it would not shock us if Reeves led the team in minutes. I wouldn't bet the house on it, but it wouldn't shock me.
I'll say this much. If I were to bet the house on any player, because I simply had to bet my house for some dystopian reason.
Well, plus we both rent. It's not even, your house.
I would bet on Austin Reeves. If I had to bet on somebody, that's who I'd bet on.
The question becomes, like, there's the question of whether or not Reeves is that guy. Whether he will, be on the floor to that level, whether he can but the other question that gets there is, like, can anybody really lighten the burden while LeBron is on the floor? And in that respect, I know you dug up some numbers.
Well, this actually got sparked from a question that was left for us by Dedev1718. I think Austin will be really good this year once he comes back down to earth a bit. LeBron does not allow anyone to eat more than he eats, so it'll be interesting to see some tug of war with the ball. And the part of that I found interesting wasn't the idea of the tug of war or, LeBron, I guess it being implied that he wouldn't want to be outshined by anybody else. Frankly, we need more evidence of other guys on this team being able to consistently outshine LeBron anyway. That's kind of cart ahead of the horse. But what I did find interesting is just the idea of great players as they age, easing that load off them, but the habits that need to change for them. And like LeBron, every single year, especially since Anthony Davis arrived, there's been this talk about easing that load off him offensively, and it never happens. Like, injuries have played a role to some degree, but there's also habits. Like, LeBron is used to having the ball in his hands and rightly thinks it should be there a lot. And, like, to some degree, that is ego. But, it's also just this is how he's been his entire career. Like, his load may get lightened defensively, but there is no evidence.
Well, LeBron has already lightened his load.
Right.
He's taking care of that.
That's a decision he made unilaterally, similarly to how we saw, like, even pre-Achilles, like the last year or so with Kobe, he started unilaterally making that decision. But, like, for example, LeBron's usage rate last season, even after the All-Star break and after the trade deadline, it went from 33.5 by Basketball References metrics pre-All-Star break to 33.4. Like, it was exactly the same. And LeBron's scoring average with the Lakers, highest of his career, albeit by a slim margin, but it's also gone incrementally up over the years, not down. And, maybe with a roster this deep, and I think this is the deepest roster he's had since being a Laker, some of this changes, but it might also be an assumption that to think that anything is going to change.
Two things about that. The first one is, it's not just the star that has to adjust to that idea of lowering the usage of it's also the other players. Anybody who has ever played with LeBron, and we saw this with Kobe, it's like, you're going to defer to LeBron because LeBron is better at this than you are. LeBron is better at orchestrating the offense. LeBron is better at scoring than you are. LeBron is better at passing than you are. LeBron's better than you are. And so the natural thing to do, especially when you have someone like LeBron, who it's not like if you give him the ball, it's never going to come back. It's not going to move. It's, you're just, you're throwing it to ISO Joe or whatever it might be. There is a tremendous team benefit to letting LeBron do LeBron things. So I think one of the places where, and I apologized at the end of yesterday's episode for being enthusiastic about Austin Reeves. It's August. We're rolling into September. The World Cup's happening. What I'm about to say is going to make that sound like I was just like shortchanging Reeves. It's helpful to have when you're looking for players to take the burden off of somebody like LeBron, who at his core is a multifaceted player with great team instincts. It helps to have somebody else on the floor who profiles in a similar way. I'm not saying Austin Reeves is as good as LeBron, but he does some of the same things ethos wise. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You understand what I'm getting at here? Not that he's better, just that he will also make the right pass. And if you you let Reeves orchestrate, you can increase his usage without gumming up and sacrificing the talents of other people on the floor. So if you're going to find a player who can help legitimately lighten the burden on LeBron, Reeves profiles that way better than I would say a classic point guard, which is often how teams try to take the burden off of star players.
I mean, that does make sense, but at the same time, this reminded me a bit of the 2011-12 season when the Lakers brought in Ramon Sessions to orchestrate pick and roll. And this was something that I know Laker fans had wanted to see. I know you and I covering the team, we thought that pick and roll element could be really useful. I know Kobe talked about wanting to have more options with pick and roll.
You want to play off ball, Andy.
Right. And he did. He talked really excitedly about, Ramon being able to run these sets and he can work a little bit more off ball. And it took all of about a week and a half before the ball was back in Kobe's hands, the overwhelming majority of time in possessions. And Ramon Sessions was stuck in a corner where he was frankly useless. And, to be clear, Austin Reeves is a better player than Ramon Sessions. I think he's a more well-rounded player than Ramon Sessions.
He's a better player than Ramon.
Yeah, I don't Ramon was a really nice
caveats or maybes or hedging. He's better than Ramon Sessions.
No, Ramon was a really nice guy. We both really liked him covering him, but Austin's better than he is. And LeBron is further along in his career to where it really might necessitate more. Like, seriously, LeBron, you gotta fight some instincts and let other guys step up more than Kobe was. This was still pre-Achilles. Kobe was 7 years younger than LeBron is right now. But again, there have been many times over the years where different players were brought in to ease that load off Kobe. And inevitably, that's not the way it went. And that's not a dig at Kobe. It's not a dig at all these other superstar players. It's the established pecking orders and established, images of players and what you expect from them at a superstar level. They can be very difficult to shift.
Let's stay on this because I if it's not, how do they do that? Because it's going to be really important to manage LeBron through the course of the season. And so how exactly do the Lakers accomplish that? So that's where we'll go next.
Locked on Lakers is brought to you by FanDuel, and you can get ready for the NFL season with incredible offers from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. The season is just around the corner. Cannot wait. And right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. You can use the bonus bets on spreads, player props, over-unders, so many other options. And all customers who bet $5 will get $100 off the NFL Sunday ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. $100 off just by betting $5 with FanDuel. And this is the best time to use FanDuel. It's a really easy app, fun to use, user-friendly, all that stuff. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon, again, locked on, and kick off the NFL season with an offer you don't want to miss. FanDuel, the official partner of the NFL.
Yeah, so like we were talking about, like there are a lot of ingredients, Andy, that go into this idea of a superstar stepping back. Because like oftentimes the context of that is the superstar needs to step back because the superstar isn't as good as they used to be. And so it's letting go of ceding control because you aren't effective in the same way as you once were.
The Russell Westbrook conundrum.
That's not really where the Lakers are with LeBron. And LeBron, I mean, is he as effective as he was at his peak? No. But he's still an elite level player. And so you're not taking the ball out of his hands because...
For that matter, is the same, by the way, proposition with Kobe, with what we were talking about before, too.
Correct. When we're again, sort of pre-Achilles, injuries and stuff like that, for sure. And so if it's not going to be, if you can't kind of do it by design, because the ball is just going to naturally find LeBron because he's LeBron, what is the best way for the Lakers to do this, to really manage James over the course of 82 games minus however many he misses?
Reduce his minutes. That's actually what I'm looking for, hopefully with AD as well. Like the idea of load managing them through nights off, back-to-backs, whatever. I mean, certain times that could be a necessity, certain times not. But I would really like to see the goal be having them play 3 to 5 minutes fewer per game this season than they did last year. And hopefully the depth and talent of this team allowing them to do that. It would really help, by the way, if they won more games at the top of the season and actually controlled a lot of games, because that could just provide some opportunities where LeBron and AD spend a lot of the fourth quarter icing their knees. But that's the way I would like to see this handled. We talked last week about AD and the idea of him wanting to win Defensive Player of the Year and, will he play enough games to qualify? If that's something AD really cares about, then again, the minutes to me feels like the place that you look to do it, as opposed to trying to earmark and really manipulate the schedule and how many games that he plays. That would be the way I would look to do it, is try to see if you can have LeBron playing 32 minutes a night, 31 minutes a night. Like that would make a big difference over the course of an entire season. Still let him play his game.
I agree with you. It's a matter of finding 3 or 4 or 5 minutes. And I think the Lakers start, 6 of their first 9 games are on the road. Like there are some challenges with the schedule, the way it's set up, but they don't need to be a 1 seed. They don't need to be a 2 seed. Like their goal is to not be like a 5 seed. I'm sorry, like a 7 seed. I mean, they want to stay out of the play-in is really what we're talking about here. And so, if they can do that and get off to a decent start where you're 4 or 5, 6 games over 500 after 20 games or whatever, but you're 14-6, you're 15-8, those kinds of records give the Lakers space to sit LeBron if he needs to sit Anthony Davis if he needs, but it really gives them space to actually try to keep their minutes at 31, 32, 33 versus 35, 36, 37, 38. It gives them a chance to try to make those minutes lower leverage, because not all minutes are created equal for every player. There are ways and times of the game where the minutes would be harder on LeBron than they would be like fourth quarter minutes, late fourth quarter minutes, where teams aren't able to run as much, where it gets more physical, where the contact is greater. Like you said, can you close out games once or twice a week, or every 6th or 7th game have a blowout where you're sitting guys down? Like, those minutes are going to be hugely important, because I agree with you. It's going to be really hard to change how you play with LeBron on the floor, even with somebody like Reeves, because ultimately he's still LeBron. And from a basketball perspective, it doesn't make sense to somehow de-emphasize him offensively. It just doesn't make sense from a basketball standpoint.
No, I mean, obviously LeBron can play off ball because LeBron can do anything you want offensively. And, you can find opportunities for him to get the ball on the catch, stuff like that, create easier finishing opportunities. But like, the more you start thinking about taking the ball out of his hands, the more you start thinking about him, spotting up or things like, I mean, that's not what LeBron does. It's not what you want him to be doing. But I do feel like that's the way you should be looking to try to ease this burden off, and just the physical toll of it all. Try to just have him play fewer minutes. And to a point you made before about not all minutes being created equally, the more minutes you're playing, I would think that means by definition, the more high leverage minutes you're playing, because it means you are on the court.
It certainly opens up the opportunity for it.
I feel like if you can play 32-33 versus 36-37, that's probably the difference in a lot of tight fourth quarter games down the stretch, where, as you said, it often gets more physical, less is getting called, things like that. So I feel like by definition, if he can get his minutes down, you're going to reduce at least some of the higher leverage, most taxing minutes.
You mentioned that you think this is maybe the best depth the Lakers have had in the LeBron era. Do you think so, more than the 2020 team?
Yeah, because I think they have more skill players. And I think they have more guys who offensively, if nothing else, although I think they have some upside compared to last year defensively too, but they have more guys who you can put the ball in their hands and they can either create for others or create their own shot than they had in the 2019-2020 season. And I think that becomes especially important because LeBron's 4 years older than that team.
Right.
So yeah, I think in terms of pure talent, this is the most depth he's had.
And it's certainly the most balance. I mean, I think that the balance of this roster, top to bottom, is better than the balance. And I think, it's easy to forget, they had some pretty good players on that 2020 team. It's not like that,
They did, but that team was more tailor-made for the idea of 2 stars and a bunch of role players, but that is easier to do when LeBron is 4 years younger. Like, for LeBron at this stage of his career just needs more help.
The other argument that I don't want to get into now, like when you start comparing these rosters, it does get into interesting things. Like, that was one that was going around last week, like the Caruso versus Reeves thing, like, trying to really compare it. So, I mean, talent to talent, it's a different kind of roster and all that stuff. But I do think the balance of this one.
Well, it's what I'm talking about too, with the difference between 2020 versus 2024 is, LeBron can't play small forward. Like, the idea of like the 2 big lineup with LeBron at the 3, like, that can't be done.
Right.
And that in and of itself speaks to the differences that come with aging. Like, that's not a realistic possibility for this team.
So I did discover one more thing. The Austin Reeves fandom has reached a level that I did not anticipate. I'll share that next. And was it Robert Horry talking about Michael Cooper?
Yep.
So this is one of the classic Lakers franchise fan debates about how the Lakers handle retired jerseys, and the absolute symbol of this discussion is Michael Cooper, who Robert Horry was talking about. We'll get to all of those things next. Andy, one more sign that apparently Austin Reeves has arrived. I didn't see this. This is apparently an Austin Reeves mural that has gone up in LA.
Oh, wow.
Saw this via Twitter. An Austin Reeves mural somewhere, I think somewhere in like South LA. I'll see if I can find an exact location. But this apparently is a thing that exists on a wall in Los Angeles. The man has his own mural. So
he is him.
There you go. Once you reach mural status, you're doing something right. So
it's like the murals of us in the Philippines.
Right. I'm going to try to see if I can find out where that is. Robert Horry is talking about retiring Michael Cooper's jersey. I know you and I have had this conversation before. I'm not entirely sure we agree, at the very least, on like the role of honor, like the way teams and halls of fame and all that stuff should honor role players. But starting with just the Lakers, there are a lot of people who think Michael Cooper should be both in the Hall of Fame, first and foremost, but then at the very least ought to be retired by the Lakers.
Well, I thought this was interesting the way Horry framed this, and this was on his podcast, the Big Shot Bob podcast. And he was talking about it also through the context of LeBron, because Jeannie Buss has already said that when LeBron retires, they will retire his jersey at the crypt. Quote, I base everything off Michael Cooper. It's just so hard for me when you retire a guy's number and you don't retire Michael Cooper's number. And it's just, to me, nobody should go before him. Two-time defensive player of the year, helped them win championships. He always guarded the people that Magic couldn't. Taking us back to an earlier podcast and that argument. It's just so many things that, and it just goes to show that people in the league and the NBA and across, they don't appreciate defense unless you're Ben Wallace or Dennis Rodman. And I just think that if you retire LeBron's jersey, you got to retire Michael Cooper's, because he's just a Lakers legend to me. And, it's an interesting way of framing it, because what Horry is talking about in certain respects is beyond what Michael Cooper specifically meant on the court and the ways he contributed. And Michael Cooper was a big part of Showtime, and Michael Cooper was a damn good player. He's also talking about the way you are loved by a fan base. And I think what Cooper is saying is, to Laker fans, particularly the ones who have been fans for decades, Michael Cooper means as much to them, if not more, than LeBron, which is an interesting way of framing all this, because a lot of the retired jerseys and stuff you do, it's fan service. There's an element of fan service to it.
I mean, one thing, like when we did our episode, for example, on Rings of Honor, obviously for any other franchise, Michael Cooper would be in a Ring of Honor. The only reason he's not in the Lakers Ring of Honor is the Lakers don't have a Ring of Honor, because they only do retired jerseys, and they have so many retired numbers that Giannis is going to have to change his number when he comes to LA. I don't know. I personally like this dynamic the Lakers have, this incredibly high bar to have your jersey retired and all that kind of stuff. But I do understand the other side of this argument and how it excludes players like Coop, who are so much part of the fabric. And while you can say, like, yeah, they're, he's on TV and the Lakers keep him involved in stuff and he's around all the time and he's, there's still something about formalizing that kind of honor that the Cooper level players, the Horrys, the Derek Fishers, and down the line just cannot get with the Lakers. And it is different, and it does cost them something, I think.
Well, yeah, I mean, and it costs them recognition. It sometimes can cost them money and like economic opportunities and things like that. Yeah. As much as Michael Cooper is a local legend, and to anybody who ever followed the Lakers, there is extra cachet in terms of opportunities and things like that when you can add. They retired Lakers.
Right. Lakers retired. Right. I'm not talking about, because I don't think he's a Hall of Famer. I think he is close, but I think he is beneath that threshold of being a Hall of Famer. Like, a lot of it to me is like that sort of gut reaction. Is blank a Hall of Famer? You kind of, that first instinct is usually the right one. And for me, he's like, no, close, but no.
I mean,
I've seen the argument, and I'm not going to kill you for it. But
if defense if you factor in defense, and he was a good 3-point shooter, at least a good 3-point shooter for his time, before the shot was really emphasized, and he was a great threat in the open court. But the man made 8 all defensive teams and was defensive player of the year one season, 86-87. And a critical part of 5 championships. He's one of the, I guess it gets to what Horry was saying, that like, unless you are Ben Wallace or Dennis Rodman, you can be one of the best defenders of the last 30 to 40 years. Michael Cooper is one of the most recognized defenders of the last 30 to 40 years, 40 years in basketball. And it's not going to get him likely sniffing the Hall of Fame like in any real way.
Do you think he was on that level though defensively with a Ben Wallace or a Rodman? Because I don't. Those guys were transcendent defenders, and rebound and specifically good at and obviously Cooper's not going to rebound in the same way.
I don't know, man. Cooper locked dudes up.
Well, I'm not trying to impugn the defense.
No, I know you're not, but you asked the question. I mean, to be honest, some of what will make you feel like, I think consciously or unconsciously, that Coop might not be at the level of a Ben Wallace or Dennis Rodman is you're like, well, those guys are in the Hall of Fame.
Right. That's true. And also feel like it is a bit unfair because those guys were big enough to be able to have the size to have that sort of transcendent statistical.
Yeah. And look, I mean, I was a massive Ben Wallace fan. I thought he should have been in the Hall of Fame, and I'm glad that he made it in. I think he was an incredible defensive player, an incredibly unique defensive player. But do I definitively think he was more impactful than Michael Cooper, with the caveat of saying I saw more of Ben Wallace's games in real time than Coops? I'm not confident saying that he was. In all honesty, I'm not. I mean, you make 8 all defensive teams, and playing in a league where you were going up against some really, really good wing players. Pretty good.
Again, I could be easily swayed here, in part because I don't care that much. I am not precious about the Hall of Fame. I think you need to have a threshold. You need to have a bar somewhere, but that line is always very fuzzy because there's always going to be the least qualified Hall of Famer. Someone's got to be the worst player in the Hall of Fame. I guess everybody needs to be a first ballot caliber guy to be in the Hall of Fame. So, would Coop be in the bottom 5th? Probably, but there is a bottom 5th. You're allowed to be in there and still be in the Hall of Fame. Fun Michael Cooper stat, just to talk about how the game has changed. You mentioned, good 3-point shooter for his era. Let's look at this season. In 1985-86, when he shot a career high 38.7% from 3-point range. How many 3-pointers did he take per game?
Probably 1.3.
Higher than that. 2.
1.9.
2.
Okay.
2. That's pretty amazing.
Game done changed. One last thing I wanted to mention too, when we made the comparisons to Rodman and Wallace, who, if you look at their resumes, their defensive accolades, both of them made all-star teams and Cooper didn't, and both made all NBA teams and Cooper didn't. But I think you tended to get more of that recognition as a big man, and traditionally big men win Defensive Player of the Year way more than wing defenders.
Correct.
Far, far more. So it's
easier to see what they're doing.
Right. And there's more tangible ways to recognize it. And I think in certain respects, you have to be careful with how you play the accolades game. The last thing I would note, though, is if, say, the door is open to Michael Cooper having his jersey retired, even if he's not in the Hall of Fame, because you're, recognizing the exceptions that prove the rule, as Robert Horry is contending should be the case for Michael Cooper, that also opens the door for Robert Horry having his jersey retired. So heady play, big shot, Bob.
It is. But I think Michael Cooper.
I see what you're doing there, Horry.
Coop might be the exception that proves the rule, or he is not, to me. Again, Ring of Honor, we had that discussion, but
Robert Horry is in a Ring of Honor. You can't.
Right, but I'm saying, but like retiring the jersey, all that kind of stuff. I don't know.
Okay, is there anybody? Okay, before we go, let's just say for the sake of the argument that Cooper would get his jersey retired because he really is, I think, the highest level guy that you would make this argument for that's not in the Hall of Fame. I think
I would agree with that.
Is there anybody else, whether Horry, Fisher, Byron Scott, Bob McAdoo, he's in the Hall of Fame. He just does not have a retired Laker jersey.
Right. And by the time, because of his role with the Lakers, I mean, Michael Cooper was a far greater Laker than Bob McAdoo was, even if Bob McAdoo was a better NBA player.
Right. Yeah. But is there,
it's like
whether Fish, Horry, Byron Scott?
No, I don't think
Byron
so.
would probably
be behind. If I'm going in order, it would be Coop, then Byron. There's probably dudes from like the 60s and 70s I don't know about. Happy Hairston or something like that. But
he was pretty good.
He was. But like I'm saying, I never saw these people play. I can't. Zelmo, Beatty. Like I don't know. But of the dudes that I have at least some exposure to, I would go Coop, Byron, Fisher,
Horry.
I mean, you got to put Fish in front of Horry because Fish
was there longer.
Long-time starter, played more minutes.
Titles.
It hit some pretty important shots himself.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, no, he had 5 titles with the Lakers.
Odom probably before Horry. Yeah. The Odom versus Horry is an interesting one for a Ring of Honor. I would put Lamar in front of him.
All right, well, leave comments on the YouTube comment section about who you. If there was an exception that would prove the rule, if you open the door for a Michael,
what order would you do
Laker?
It in?
Yeah. What order would you do it in? Who would you do it for?
Okay. Also, to somebody on the YouTube channel, we asked the question: is Mookie Betts the most popular athlete in Los Angeles? The response somebody left made a top 10 list for us that I actually think is interesting from a Lakers standpoint, which we will maybe get to later in the week. We are not going to have a show on Thursday because it's the off season. We need some days off here, but more importantly, it's our fantasy football draft on Wednesday, and we need the time to focus on things that aren't this podcast. It's too important. I think most of you understand. Andy and I play in this league against each other. It is very important to both of us that we beat the other brother. So no show for Thursday. We'll be back on Friday. Everyone have a good night.